Yes.
So the next segment is one of probably the most arguable, pivotal for the well-being of life on Earth, being intentional about our environment, impact, and understanding its implications for all of us humans, other species, and also the future generations.
And while I think we all know that human induced climate change has had a very severe impact, I feel that sometimes we fail to grasp the full extent of it, right? From melting ice caps to species extinction, the signs are evident. And I think it's very crucial for us to recognize the interconnectedness of these changes and our role as humans in contributing to it.
Yeah, for sure, Asta. And I think we've all been hearing this for years on end that the planet is dying and that humans are killing the planet. But as you said, I don't think I also until off late knew the magnitude of it. So do you think we should take a minute or two to share some facts with everyone?
Yes, let's do that. Let's do that
Okay,
for
so
sure.
can we please have the presentation on the screen?
Perfect. Yes.
Okay, so here we have data from Carbon Brief, which is from scientists published peer-reviewed studies over the last 2 decades on extreme event attribution. These studies have the power to link the seemingly abstract concept of climate change with personal and tangible experiences of weather, and Carbon Brief maps out to the best of their knowledge every extreme weather attribution study published till 2022.
And while no extreme, okay, I've been asked to move to the right, okay. And while no extreme weather event ever comes down to a single cause, climate scientists have increasingly explored human fingerprints on so-called natural disasters. Heat waves, droughts, floods, storms. I must say, these numbers at least made me very uncomfortable.
Yeah, they make me too as well.
Yeah.
So on slide one, we have here all the extreme weather events that scientists have found to have no human influence. Not bad, right?
Yeah, it looks like we've not been responsible for quite a
Yeah.
few events, right?
Yeah.
But that's until we move to slide 2. Here are all the events where human influence was found. That's significantly more than the number of events that humans don't have any influence on, right, Ayan? But how much more,
Yeah.
right?
Can we have slide 3 now?
Yeah.
Here are all the events. 71% of all extreme weather events studied in the past 20 odd years were made more likely or more severe by human caused climate change. That's 71%. That's over two-thirds.
Those numbers are
Quite scary.
very scary. And I think this really makes us realize the magnitude of human influence climate change, right? And when we look at slide 4, we see only the extreme heat events that humans seemingly had no influence on, or those which we don't know for sure. They're inconclusive. So in gray are the ones that we don't know for sure, and the blue are the ones that we know that humans had no influence on.
Right. And then on slide 5, we have all the extreme heat events influenced by humans. Again, the numbers are just so much larger.
True, and out of the 152 extreme heat events, 142, which is 93%, have been made more likely or more severe because of human-caused climate change.
And it's not just extreme weather events, it's also the pollution. According to a modeling study published in the BMJ in November 2023, outdoor air pollution accounts for over 2 million deaths every year in just India alone.
Those numbers are just nothing short of horrifying. Over 2 million people die because of outdoor air pollution
Every year.
in India. That's, I don't know, I think hearing the numbers just hits differently, right?
Absolutely.
So, and given the challenges of climate change and increasing resource scarcity, the mandate to minimize our carbon footprint, there is an increased need for organizations to address climate and sustainability.
Absolutely. And understanding how organizations can use smarter design that integrate environmental and social considerations into the design processes of their products, services, spaces, and systems is absolutely essential from a mandate and responsibility standpoint, but also because it is simply the right and ethical thing to do. Customers too want eco-friendly options.
Definitely. And our panel for the day is going to go into that. But right before that, we would like all of you to watch a short film on an island country in the Micronesia sub-region of Oceania called Kiribati, which is going to be one of the first countries to be submerged due to climate change.
Could we please have the film on screen?
Oops. Sorry. Yes, could we have the film
Could we
on
have
screen?
the preview film on the screen?
The science is very clear about climate change. Within the century, our entire nation will be underwater. As in some countries, you have a cyclone, a hurricane. Over time, the land remains there, the water recedes. In our case, it does not. It's a disaster that doesn't go away. Our reality is that we have communities who already have to relocate, left their villages. We have communities which are on the verge of doing the same. For us, climate change is not something that's likely to happen in the future. It is happening, we are facing it. I've always referred our situation as those countries on the front line, because when we fall, there'll be another front line, and that front line will keep moving back until those countries and those people who believe they will not be affected will eventually be affected, and that is the reality we are facing.
We can still make a difference.
Question that we'll continue to ask ourselves: what is to become of our children? How will they continue to live without that link with the land and the spirits therein? I think as human beings, we are being challenged. Should we do something about it? I believe, yes. Everybody has a responsibility to do it.
Nothing more to say after that. Let's please welcome our panelists on stage. PRERNA WADIKAR, Program Director from SOULL, and L. PRABHAKAR, Executive Vice President and Head of Social Investments from ITC. Let's give them a round of applause.
Wasn't that a truly thought-provoking movie? Is this working? Yeah, wasn't that a truly thought-provoking movie which we just saw? While I was watching it, I had one thought in mind, and that was that of our... the presentation is not working. Sorry. Okay. And that was this scientist that you can see on the screen. He's a biologist from Harvard who's predicted that in the next 70 years, 70% of life form on Earth will go extinct. And he may actually be right, because in the last 400 million years, there have been 5 extinction cataclysmic events which have caused up to 90% of the entire life forms to go extinct. And a lot of scientists believe that we are in the midst of the 6th extinction event, that we ourselves are in the danger of being wiped out, and most importantly, we are the cause for it. Let me ask a very pertinent question which will bring to all of us the urgency of the situation. Do you think the fluttering of this butterfly could have an impact on our future? In the next 10 minutes, I'm going to walk you through a very visual, virtual tour across 3 continents and try to explore 2 questions. One is how, if at all, a butterfly could affect our future. And 2, what can we as responsible leaders do to safeguard our generations? Now, let's talk about butterfly, right? It's a pollinator. 90% of all crop forms depend on pollinators for their existence. And these contribute to 17 lakh crore rupees every year on the global economy. Now, let's focus specifically on one crop, which you see on the screen, which is cotton. India has been the world's 2nd largest cotton producer at 6,000 metric ton cotton per year. And that number, or that fertility, we have achieved largely because of a very favorable climate in the states of Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Gujarat. These are the largest cotton producing states. But that climate might not be a reality anymore and might not continue to exist. Let's take the recent case of Cyclone Toti, which has been one of the most severe cyclones we saw in the last couple of years alone, which wiped out 90% of standing crop in just the Saurashtra region. Of course, it had its impact on cotton, right? And what happened subsequently is the cotton prices rose. Not just because it affected India, it also affected neighboring countries like Pakistan. Climate does not look at geographical boundaries, right? Pakistan happens to be the 4th largest producer of cotton in the world. So the 2nd and the 4th largest producer of cotton in the world got directly impacted by a cyclone, which increased the price of your average cotton t-shirt across the world by $0.50, from $1.50 to $2. Now let's move to Europe, right? On an average, it's been seen that Europeans, or the Western world, let's not specifically target a certain region, consume about 26 kgs of textile every single year, and they waste or discard at least 11 kgs every year, right? And if you happen to be an adventurous globetrotter like me, and find yourself in this tiny country of Ghana that you see on your screens, you will invariably stumble upon this market. This is called the Kantamanto market, world's largest destination for used clothes. The streets, as you can see, overflow or flood with clothes. Every single inch of this market, which is made by 30,000 vendors, is covered with used clothes from all over the world. On an average, you have 1.5 pieces of cloth coming into this tiny country every week, of which at least 60 lakhs gets thrown away. Now, why would you throw away more than half the clothes that are given to you free of cost? One, they're dirty. 2, they're torn. 3, they're culturally not acceptable in the African society and civilization. And 4, the size. Imagine a 6 feet big American and a tiny African, right? So let me put this further into context, which is you dump 1.5 crore of clothes every week into a country whose population is 3 crores. So 78 crores textile pieces go into this population, and they call this the Oboroni Wabu. It translates literally to dead white man's clothes. No wonder the landfills are inundated with waste clothes. The water bodies are clogged. Very recently, in just about 1 or 2 years ago, one of their landfills caught a fire because of the trapped methane gases, and that fire could not be doused for 11 months, right? And we all know that greenhouse gases are the single largest factor for climate change. And discarded fashion is responsible for 10% of greenhouse gas in the world. This is how we calculate carbon emissions of a country. Now let's not look at the sophistication of the formula, but what this can translate to is as the GDP per capita and the population increase, our carbon emissions increase. How does that affect you, me, and our businesses, you will ask. What you see on the screen is what all of us use. Western Digital is the world's largest producer of hard disks in your computers, digital storage systems. There was a huge flood in Thailand, and their 2 production factories were buried under 6 feet of water. You can see that. The boat it's not a waterway, it's supposed to be a road, right? And they had to not only shut down the production factories, the cost of their hard disk rose by 47% overnight. You know how that translates into the cost of your laptop, your data servers, and your storage devices. So supply chain disruptions, workforce productivity hampering, obviously. Now let's look at this one, PG&E. This is a Pacific gas based out of California. One small spark in its millions of wiring, exacerbated by climate-induced heat, caused the deadliest wildfire in California, resulting in the company having to file for bankruptcy. Now, who would have thought? And not going so much across the world, let's look at India. Heat-related incidents is going to cost us a loss of 2 billion hours of labor productivity every single year. And there was a survey done on 22 economic factors of India, which highlighted that India will end up spending $200 billion every year in the next 70 years on climate-related disaster management, which is the highest in the world, which is going to be the highest in the world. Well, we are #1 somewhere else as well, right? So not all is that bad. We have this organization, the World Economic Forum for Climate and Economy, which says that if we do take care of at least five of the main economic factors, there is an opportunity for $2.1 trillion worth of new business prospects and 65 million new jobs. And what are those 5 sectors? Obviously, clean energy systems, introducing clean technology to 1 billion more people, smarter urban development, smart and sustainable cities, which we are obviously seen as growing, sustainable farming. I don't have to emphasize more on this. Smart water management and circular economy. But how do we actually do this in real life? I want to invite our very learned my co-panelist, Mr. Prabhakar, to share his 20 years of work experience of how to translate this into action.
Thank you, PRERNA. I think that's a perfect segue, so to say, for me to illustrate, showcase how all the dimensions that PRERNA mentioned actually gets addressed. She alluded to World Economic Forum. Just till I get a hang of it. What was the thing that you did? Yeah.
The PPT is not changing.
Is the old PPT. Yup. So I just sort of build on the context of World Economic Forum. This is what the 10 global risks were identified. The message here I wanted to leave was, while the top 3 looks like environment and then there are social, etc. The reality is all the 10 risks are linked to environment, including something like a geoeconomic confrontation. Most of them will be triggered on issues related to environment, whether it's wanting to control supply chain or issue of resources, etc. So just keep this perspective in mind when we are sort of looking at environment. What's been ITC's ethos? It's basically looking at business models. Very often we think that business models should be only serving the economic purpose. But if you're able to derive a model which actually caters both to economic, environment, and social, which is where you look at growth with livelihoods and growth with climate action, that's when you look at what in ITC we refer to as responsible competitiveness. And I think in the previous panel, the whole discussion was, you don't try to sort of tinker, but when you're starting to think about something, how do you sort of weave all these dimensions together? And that's what really is responsible competitiveness. A quick summary in terms of where we are. Morning there was a discussion, I think when the Bangalore airport discussion happened about carbon positive, water positive, solid waste positive. We've been positive for almost 15 years plus on all the 3 dimensions. Energy is 43% renewable energy and giving livelihoods to 6 million people, like what I was mentioning, growth with livelihoods. And these are some of the external aspects. All the ratings, whether it's MSCI, DJCI, LEED Zero, etc., and CDP, which is one of the most revered certifications of benchmarking. We are actually A in water. There are only 2 companies in India who got A in water, and in climate we have A minus. So let me sort of tell you what we do. This is our social forestry model. And just look at the whole video in terms of the scale, etc. Now this is in a place called Bhadrachalam, which is basically a tribal backyard. And this forests are actually being sort of grown in absolutely arid land, land where nothing else was possible earlier. So it's not like you're using a fertile land, but it's a land which had no use. And when you sort of convert it into an economic purpose, that's where your innovative business model happens. So our entire paper business is based on the social forestry model. It's not only generating employment for the people who are working in this social forestry area, but it's a fantastic carbon sink. It acts as a topsoil protection, and more importantly, it reduces GHG emission. And it's also not something which is done at small scale. If you see, it's close to about 11.7 lakh acres. And yesterday I was telling somebody who's there in this audience who attended my session yesterday, Bangalore is 1.83 lakh acres. So there's almost about 5 times the size of Bangalore that we are talking of. Coupled with biodiversity. And I want to make a difference between biodiversity and tree plantation. Very often we don't focus in a tree plantation in terms of survival, how does it fit with the rest of the ecosystem, how does it add value to the local economy and the community. And this again is actually a very, very deep science where you start looking at mapping of commons. Grazing is a big issue in terms of why biodiversity does not really work out, and therefore you need to create appropriate interventions where the communities which are dependent on those forests, etc., don't get into the forest and deplete the forest resources. And more importantly, I think it's the choice of species. We don't tend to be conscious of what species is appropriate for which ecosystem, which context, both sociological, environmental, and geographical. And again here, because of the work that we've been done, and there's just some examples of, you can see what it was before and after. you have actually started doubling the species there. And that's the real impact of creating an ecosystem. Prerna mentioned about butterflies, pollinators, etc. So when you're talking about biodiversity, it's not just about the tree cover, but you're trying to create the entire living ecosystem, each one of them interdependent on one another. She mentioned about water, and this is something which is of huge value and significance, especially for ITC, where most of our businesses are actually dependent on agriculture. And the biggest risk for agriculture is water. And if we don't address this, the entire portfolio of businesses of ITC could be at huge risk. So here we look at both supply side in terms of creating water harvesting structures so that you collect water during the rainy season and ensure that the water is available at the right time for irrigation primarily. The other is to actually look at demand management, and what our experience has shown that you can create a much greater impact on demand management, essentially trying to reduce consumption of water in agriculture, what we call as more crop per drop. And this is the effect in terms of the supply side, close to about 30,000 water harvesting structures. And this water harvesting structures cover a land mass of about 15 lakh acres. Again, just a perspective, Bangalore size is 1.8 lakh acres. So this is the type of structures that one is talking of in terms of check dams, large structures, small structures, etc. And just wanted you to guess, where is this structure? Where would you expect this structure to be? Sorry? Kerala? It's not from Kerala, it's from North India somewhere. It's a place, Sanoti village in Pratapgarh district of Rajasthan. Pratapgarh district of Rajasthan, Pratapgarh, which is fairly water stressed area. This is the type of impact that you can create when you're actually working in an integrated manner on a whole watershed ecosystem. There's a place in, I don't know how many of you are from Chennai. There's a place called Tiruvallur. This is what, guess what is this? It's actually a water body. We started working on this water body. It took us 50 truckloads to clean that particular water body. And then we did the entire mapping and working with the community, etc. This is what it is now. A hand of friendship to a lake, and it will reciprocate the sentiment. Cyclone Michuang happened recently. The entire area got affected. You had heavy rains in Chennai even 5-6 years back. The same area, when that sort of rains happened, the local community of about 750 households, they suffered for 20 days. They didn't get back into routine economic activity for 20 days. This time when the rainfall happened, it was 25% more than what it was 5 years back. But the entire community came back into action within 2 days. Because all the water, that excess water, flew into this particular water body because it was cleared, and you had actually created an entire mechanism of ensuring that the water flows there. What we are also doing is not just look at this demand management. If you can just see at this number, it's sort of almost about 1,080 million cubic meters. Again, a very difficult number to visualize. But what we have now started doing is looking at the entire river basin approach. When you do at a demand supply, you do in a 5-kilometer radius or 10-kilometer radius. I don't know how many of you are from Maharashtra. There's the entire thing called Gode River Basin. So we started working right from the source of the Gode River Basin to ensure that there is enough water in the entire upstream and downstream until the time it reaches our factory and the entire catchment area. So how do you look at an integrated approach? Right now in Bangalore, we are working with Indian Institute of Science to map the Pennar River Basin, and then again we will sort of have a similar intervention. So two things happen. when you do this type of an integrated approach, you're actually taking what we call as a stewardship role, where you're not only being selfish to say, I protect my requirement of water, but you also take care of the requirement of the entire community and ensure that there is enough water balance, and that's what we call as positive water balance, enough water balance so that there is no ripple effect or a negative pushback from the community that you are drawing water or you are consuming water at our expense. When it comes to water, again, there's a very interesting certification, and that would be my recommendation to many of you who are interested on kickstarting some of these things. Just look at certifications. It's a very, very useful tool and framework to actually go through the entire evaluation mechanism. It tells you how to plan, what to do, how to do, etc. So when it comes to water, there's something called Alliance for Water Stewardship Certification. Nobody in India has got this certification as yet. We are amongst the first factories, not just in India, but also in Asia. And already about 4 factories have got. And in the next 2-3 weeks, we're expecting 2 more factories to get this water certification. How have we prioritized the factories where we will do this certification? Factories which are in water-stressed areas. There's no point getting this certification where water is in plenty. It's just fooling ourselves. So we picked up the hardest of the catchment areas where they are defined by the Central Groundwater Board that these are water-stressed areas, and then actually have taken this intervention which involves both the society, community, and what we do inside. Prerna mentioned about agriculture, extremely important. But again, you need a template or a framework. And we have what we call as climate smart agriculture. It's an integrated approach where we look at different elements, whether it's weather, water, seed, all of them contribute to either depleting the natural resources or can help you mitigate and adapt to the changing climate challenges. What is important when you do these interventions, I can tell the farmers to reduce water, but if it is at the cost of yields or income or returns, it's not a sustainable thing. So you'll have to keep the numerator also going, and then you can work on the denominator. And the interventions that we have done is actually demonstrated a significant reduction in GHG potential. I wanted to give you 2 examples here quickly. All of you hear about stubble burning. Delhi faces this particular issue, and then you blame Punjab for it actually, and you blame farmers for it. And a lot of people have tried to sort of reduce stubble burning. So we've started small, but then we have now covered the entire Kapurthala district. This year when the wheat season has ended, if I remember correctly, and this is small, we're talking of 2 lakh acres. On 2 lakh acres, no stubble burning happened in about 94% of this 2 lakh plus acres, 2.7 lakh acres. Why did it happen? We didn't approach it saying that you reduce stubble burning so that people in Delhi can live better. We worked backwards, understood through research why stubble burning happens, what needs to be done to sort of minimize stubble burning, and started working with the farmers on those practices. Second thing, we didn't go to the farmers just 1 month before and saying that don't do stubble burning. You have to engage 365 days a year, earn their trust. Because if I just come and say don't do this practice, they're not likely to believe you. But once they know that I'm going to be there with you 365 days a year, and you start working with them, they are more likely to adopt the practices that you are talking of. Interestingly, the 7% that did not happen, because my board was pushing why it's only 93%, why not 95, 96. What the farmers came back and told us was, and some of you are familiar with Punjab and the whole agitation, the unionization of farmers is very, very strong there. And they said, we need to be seen to be still part of the union and with the entire community. So what we do, one corner of our plot, we still do stubble burning so that we don't face antagonism from them. So the 7% also that did not happen was to sort of maintain solidarity with the rest of the system. Quickly towards green infrastructure, I think this is a very important component which we tend to miss out when we look at environment, and we are probably the largest footprint of green buildings. We were pioneers in green buildings. and as we speak, including offices and hotels. LEED certification is one of the most premium certifications when it comes to green building and infrastructure. We have almost about 40 such buildings, first 20 hotels, data center, all of them are LEED Zero certified, LEED Carbon certified, LEED Zero Water certified, which essentially means that all these factories are balancing the water consumption or the emissions part of it through savings, through interventions, and through working in the community. We are now setting up a lot of new factories, and I really liked in the previous session when Srinivas was telling of giving the example of hotels. Start planning right at beginning. So I don't know how many of you are aware, there are clear global benchmarks on when you're constructing a building, what sort of emission is happening because of the design of the building, use of materials, what type of materials you're using, etc. Our most recent factory that we set up in Khurda Road in Orissa, if the global benchmark was 600 something per unit of emission per se, we've been able to construct that factory at about 450 as against the global benchmark of 600. Fundamentally because of the type of designing, the type of civil engineering work that we took up and the type of construction material that was taken. That's what actually helps you in green buildings. All our factories, as I said, in terms of the AWS certification, you need to also look at the other forms of energy. Our paper business and a lot of our other businesses actually fairly energy intensive. So how do you sort of look at what sort of boilers, both in terms of engineering specifications or what sort of fuels that you use? 43% of our entire energy footprint is renewable energy, primarily through solar and wind. And this is just one of the examples of a solar energy farm in Tamil Nadu. So we have such similar farms in different parts of the country, both wind farms and solar farms. She spoke about circularity. Again, extremely important. And the way we are looking at it is, and we call ourselves plastic neutral, because we collect more plastic from the system than the plastic that goes because of our products and services. And we have very, very extensive interventions. One of the interventions is what we call as well-being out of waste, and the other is as part of our social responsibility initiatives. Between the two initiatives, almost about 60 lakh households across the country are covered in terms of creating awareness, etc. And in the areas where we have been working, this is government data, landfill, which used to be close to about 95%, has come down to 13%. Fundamentally because of behavior change in terms of segregation of source, setting up an entire value chain of managing the waste that gets generated and therefore minimizing waste that goes to landfill. Very interesting example again, we are actually working with temples, and now we are planning to call it as iconic places, where again, how do you work at the entire circular economy principle, and using the waste that gets generated or collected, feed back into the same temple premises for either a gaushala or a kitchen that is being working or a garden, etc. I think the other important thing is packaging. Extremely important to go more and more towards sustainable packaging, but it's not easy, especially when you're in a foods business, large foods portfolio, because you also need to preserve what is there inside the whole packaging material, the risk of infestation, etc. But very happy to share that we've been able to make significant progress, including using paper packaging and then mono-material packaging, etc. And increasingly we'll find that more and more products in our portfolio will start using sustainable packaging. And whilst we were doing, what we have now realized is suddenly sustainable packaging has emerged as a new line of business for ITC. Leveraging our expertise in packaging and paper, and we are about to start a new factory in first week of March in a place called Sihor in Madhya Pradesh, which is going to use plant-based packaging material. And you see some of these products, which some of this you actually see in your iPhones, etc. They're all moving towards sustainable packaging. And that's the opportunity for India. And if it can be plant-based, nothing like it. The last piece which I just wanted to sort of touch upon, again, when you are an FMCG company, it's extremely important to sort of look at what sort of logistics footprint you leave, because this whole thing of scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. Electric vehicles is an obvious one, but we are doing a very calibrated approach to electrical vehicles, because there's whole issue of what do you do with the life cycle assessment of electric vehicles. But there's a lot that you can do in terms of network optimization using technology. How do you do route level optimization? Because if you can reduce the travel time, if you can reduce the travel distance, all of them actually contribute to reducing the footprint in terms of carbon emissions. So this is again a very, very significant intervention in terms of looking at the environment aspect. What I've attempted to do is very quickly give you a full value chain perspective, right from sourcing, the back end of agriculture, infrastructure, packaging, and in terms of logistics. Last piece, it's equally important how do you sort of work with the government. As ITC, I can do only this much. But if I can actually work with the government, especially in the areas of environment, and we work very closely on water stewardship. We're working, for example, with the Karnataka government on helping them do watershed planning based on a tool that we have created using our experience. We are working with Rajasthan government on the entire aspect of biodiversity. How do you do in terms of the water stewardship and biodiversity integration in Maharashtra, where we work with the Forest Department of Maharashtra. So when you do a partnership with government, you are able to sort of amplify best practices, good things, then you can have a much better impact in the larger ecosystem and community. Are we resting on our laurels? Answer is no. We have very, very clear targets for 2030 on every aspect, whether it's in terms of GHG emissions, energy, water consumption reduction, rainwater harvesting prevention, like biodiversity, looking at 10 million acres, climate smart agriculture, 3 million acres. So every target that we have taken is quite stiff, but again, it's not just a target, it's also important to have a pathway. So we have a pathway which is a yearly roadmap, which gets reviewed by our board, and then we sort of keep modifying in case we can accelerate. 2 years back, our target for 2030 for biodiversity was only 5 lakh acres. But we felt that now we've got the confidence to scale it up, so we revised the target to 10 lakh acres. So that's what I had to share in terms of, it's not just a passion for profitable growth, but I think if we can have both sustainable and inclusive, that's what will be good for the country. Thank you.
This day and time, a moment for photograph is more important than a conversation. So Prabhakar, this was super mind-blowing. I didn't know you at ITC do so many things across the entire ESG value chain. How do you integrate the environmental aspects of consciousness into your organizational culture?
So we have, so first let me give you a structural framework. All businesses in ITC, they need to do a materiality assessment. Materiality assessment started something recently, but before that we used to have what we call as risk assessment. So every business is required to identify top 10 risks and then also have a plan. So invariably when you do a top 10 risk from a business perspective, environment comes in there actually. Now when you're doing the materiality index, and I don't know how many of you have heard of, there's something called double materiality, which looks at both impact and financial. And I think the moment you start bringing the financial dimension in the assessment, half your work tends to get done actually. So that's one part of it. Second part of it is it's top driven in terms of leadership, where it is very, very clearly told, let's say if I'm setting up a factory, you have to come with a clear target of how this factory will be a sustainable factory. And as I said, it starts from the construction material till the energy, etc., etc. It's also capital intensive at times, and that is where I think the company's long-term perspective to say that today it might be struggling at an internal rate hurdle, but It's okay if it is not meeting that internal rate hurdle, because in the long term, you will recover. So those type of special financial standards that you set for projects like this. The third important thing is the culture aspect, the softer aspect. And here it is more about cascading the entire thought process right across to the organization, right up to the workman or the workperson on the shop floor. And the moment that happens, even tomorrow when you're looking at a quality circle or Kaizen, etc., environment comes into as a very important thing actually. How do you look at competitions across businesses? What we have realized is creating a competitive spirit or creating pressure for benchmarks with other agencies, organizations, automatically tends to drive. So for example, this year CDP climate A-. Now all businesses have come together and said what needs to be done to get CDP A for climate next year. Because somewhere that sense of pride, that how can ITC not be in CDP A for climate? So that ability to create that sense of pride that I'm doing something which is very, very different, probably is the best trigger for creating the softer dimension.
I think that's amazing. Do we have time for audience questions? One question from the audience. Yes, I see a very strong hand there.
And just for the benefit, I'm around, so we can always catch up in conversation after the next session is over.
Hi, my name is Jim. Quick question for you. I'm grappling with the conflict of ITC being in the tobacco factor and in several other things on one side. And the other is that when we speak about sustainability, today we've gone solar and stuff like that. With lithium mines being completely on a depletion mode, in the effort of us going green and solar and everything, how is that becoming sustainable? One. Second, keeping this in mind and to look at it, go green right from the first step, why is nuclear energy not being evaluated and explored from a sustainability perspective? Because it's also about much less required for so much more exponential generation of energy for all purposes. So these are the two questions I have.
So on nuclear part, would you want to take? Because as a corporate, I really don't have a point of view
Sure.
on nuclear.
So I think you brought in two very interesting aspects. How green is green really? And what about incorporating latest nuclear technologies? I'll answer the nuclear part and I'll pass on for the green one to you. Recently, I was at COP. And one of the most interesting discussions there in the Energy Transition Hub was about using nuclear technology to desalinate ocean water, so the Middle Eastern countries are not water deprived. So there is definitely a strong use case for nuclear technology. It is being used. Why is it not proliferating? One, the cost. Second, the security. Unless we solve for affordability of using technology, large-scale adoption of the same is not practically possible. And over to you for how green are we?
So as far as the green is concerned, Jim, is at a macro level, this whole concept of just transition. And not to just ape what probably the West would be pushing. You'll have to also look at an Indian context per se, because it can't be at the cost of development also actually. So that's one issue that the government is also pushing back and we are all grappling with. When I spoke about renewable energy, one important thing that I also sort of didn't mention, it's how do you create a right balance in portfolio? It's not that I go 100% solar. You look at solar, you look at wind. And one of the important components that we are looking at, and which is a very contextualized to a India setup, is looking at biomass. And the moment you look at biomass energy, you are again actually creating livelihood opportunities for your Indian farmers actually. So we are now actually looking at how do we tweak our boiler designs, look at studying the different agri-biomasses in terms of calorific value, etc., so that you can then create a further value chain. So the issues of stubble management that we are grappling with. The pilot that we are now doing is that how can you use that stubble as biomass, then you don't have to go anywhere. The farmer also gets the benefit of it actually. So it has to be a portfolio approach when you're looking at, I mentioned about not jumping into EV. There's a big discussion happening as to how do you manage the end of life cycle on EV part of it actually. So one needs to be conscious about it. The whole discussion on lithium batteries. Are we likely to create more problem just because we don't know much about the issue of lithium, whereas we know issue of fossil fuels? Will we sort of cut one problem and create one more problem actually? So I think the whole space is evolving. It's important to keep your options open, keep your eyes and ears open, and calibrate your effort accordingly.
Yeah, so she's already nudging me that we are running out of time. I'll conclude this session firstly by thanking Prabhakar for being such a fantastic panelist. In spite of his very busy schedule, he ensured that we work seamlessly together to make this one experience for you and not two disconnected sessions. Esther, for so beautifully and tirelessly translating whatever we have been discussing, and all of you for being such a patient and fantastic participant. End of the day almost, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. I hate to have nudged you off stage, but we're running out of time. One more round of applause for them, everyone.
Thank you to our panelists for their insightful and valuable contributions to today's discussion.